welcome everyone who's here. Welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs for what should be a very to the point and compact but very important evening. And welcome to our friends abroad who are watching live stream. This is live stream on jcpa.org YouTube channel, and it's going to be recorded as part of sort of the climax of a week of what we call apartheid buster content, which we've just now finished a week of videocast, the first time this has really ever happened, showing the kaleidoscope identity, the true identity of the State of Israel, as opposed to the identity that has been foisted upon it, and it is now dominating the Western discourse, and that is, of course, what we call apartheid anti-Semitism. That's the theme of this evening, is to understand, to assess, to engage, and to combat, essentially, this historical slander. Let me just introduce this a wonderful panel and distinguished colleagues. Before I do that, I want to recognize a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Yechiel Leiter, is the Director General of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and Brigadier General Yossi Kupperwasser, who is one of our senior members of the team and has been for many years, is the former Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, who, as a mentor to me, was Yossi, you were combating apartheid anti-Semitism back in the days 10 years ago when you were 10 years ago, I think, when you were the Director General, even more, 12 years ago, when you were the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. And General Kupperwasser, of course, was the head of assessment at Israel's Military Intelligence Directorate. And anyway, it's great to see you. We have we have board members here, Howard Weissman and Dr. Joel Fishman, and many others. If I go through all of our friends and family, our time will be up. So I'm going to just, first of all, it's a great honor, Minister Amichai Chikli, the Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Social Equality, which is very important, that couplet for this evening. And we have friends from afar, Bishop Plummer, Bishop Glenn Plummer, who we were talking before, is the founder of one of the most important international television networks called the NRB, National Religious Broadcasting Board, and he was in 2019 he was crowned as a bishop. We call it crowned, right? Laktir in Hebrew. Yeah, as a bishop of Israel, consecrated. We say in Hebrew, laktir, ektiroto. Yeah, consecrated as Bishop of Israel, and it's an honor, sir, to have you with us, and your wife, Dr. Plummer. Where are you? Yes, you are here, yes. And to my left is a dear friend and colleague, Pastor Dumisani Washington, and author of the widely read Zionism in the Black Church, which is available here. Pastor Dumisani Washington is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, based in North Carolina, and has been a scholar partner of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs in the first time ever actually training 15 or 16 initial young ambassadors for Israel, young Black Americans who are friends of Israel, colleagues of Israel, in an online course over the course of a year, and then will be coming to Israel as well, and has a large pastor network in the United States. This is Pastor Dumisani's book, Zionism in the Black Church, and also a dear friend, Klaas, tell me how to exactly pronounce the last name for the 15th time, Mokgomole. Klaas Mokgomole, who's coming right all the way from South Africa, and Klaas has a fascinating story that we'll discuss as we move on. Anyway, this is an evening, it's been said, this is an evening of moral clarity. It's an evening of intellectual and moral clarity because, as Minister Chikli and I discussed over Espresso a few minutes ago, the apartheid slander has been all too underemphasized and under-discussed and underanalyzed in the decades-old demonization of Israel. It was in the last 30 years that had become a strategy of the Palestinian Authority to recast Israel, to racialize Israel as a white supremacist country based on the former apartheid South Africa identity. I think at the Jerusalem Center, what we determined and discovered really many years ago is that this really would become a national security threat to Israel and the Jewish people, and nothing short of that, because as General Cooperwasser had said, if you don't have international legitimacy, you don't have national security, because our ability as a country to defend ourselves and to be represented properly in international institutions. If we look at the mainstream legitimized international discourse today, we find that Israel, having fraudulently been recast as an apartheid white supremacist country, is actually the lingua franca and the accepted frame of reference for Israel in the United Nations, in the United Nations International Court of Justice, in the International Criminal Court, in which the Palestinian Authority has brought up Israel on these charges of apartheid. The academic discourse in hundreds of universities across North America and Europe, as well as among certain members of the House of Representatives in the United States Congress, this and the diplomatic discourse as well, has recharacterized all too commonly Israel as an apartheid state. So what we're going to do this evening is to engage our esteemed panelists here, and from his own point of view, message and underscore their understanding of this national security threat, and how Israel is now, and Friends of Israel Abroad, both in the Jewish, Christian, and even in new neighbors in the Middle East and in Africa, which the Jerusalem Center is engaging very strongly, are actually combating this libel. And therefore, I think we will add to the literature of counter apartheid, or what we call apartheid anti-Semitism, to expose it and to document it and to assess what can be done in order to correct this false narrative. I just mention as a matter of historical context, the apartheid slander did not start with the Palestinian Authority in 1993, nor did it start when Yasser Arafat addressed a Jerusalem mosque in 1994, where he openly called for jihad, even drawing the criticism of the Washington Post for such a declaration. It actually started, the first time it was mentioned, it is little known, by the PLO's first founder, Ahmed Shukeri, who was the former Saudi ambassador to the United Nations. He and former Prime Minister Golda Meir, at that time Israel's foreign minister in 1961, had a tete-a-tete at a UN discussion. And I'm holding the quote by the Shukeri-Meir exchange. And Shukeri said that he called Israel at that time an apartheid state in 1961, and he said that to prove his thesis that the, quote, apartheid of South Africa is being practiced by Israel against the Arab minority in Israel, he claimed, and he denied Israel's right to try Adolf Eichmann, the senior Nazi officer, since Israel is, quote, another Eichmann in a state. So there you see already, in 1961, the Nazification of the Jewish and democratic state and the apartheidization of Israel as well. So this has gone back decades, and so it's an important point of historical context. So let me start. Let me start with you, Pastor Dumisani. What has the apartheid slander? How is that as an engine of anti-Semitism affected the black community in the United States, and in terms of the phenomenon, we say the Kanye West phenomenon that we've seen that the ADL called America's Nazi moment very recently in an urgent interview with one of the major networks there. What has been the effect of the apartheid slander on the black community, and your other sense about the branding of Israel with this libel?
Well, you had just referenced the earliest blood libel, if you will, than 1961 in terms of Israel being labeled as an apartheid state in 1961. The specific targeting of the Black American community, we can pretty much time it when Yasser Arafat then becomes the chairman in 1969. Of course, the PLO is started in 1964. He becomes the chairman in 1969, ironically, about a year after Dr. King's assassination. And one of the first things on his agenda is to reach out to the younger, what they even call themselves, more militant wing of the Black civil rights community, the Eldridge Cleavers of the Black Panthers, the Angela Davises, the Stokely Carmichaels. And his message was pretty singular and succinct, and it was consistent. And it was that the rights that they were fighting for in the United States were parallel to what the Arab Palestinians were fighting for here in the land, and that they should be linked together, right? Now, it was fraudulent. It ramped up even more, particularly after Dr. King's death, because Dr. King, we clock it from there, not just because of the person that Dr. King was in terms of being maybe an icon of the civil rights movement, but he also spoke for the civil rights community when he told the rabbis and others that I see Israel as a oasis of brotherhood and democracy. Israel has the right to defend itself. All of these things in which the international community was counting on Dr. King to weigh in differently in that way. He did not acquiesce to that pressure. He recognized what was happening. He defended. He never dismissed the Arab community. He actually also called for what he called a Marshall Plan for the Arab community because of the poverty that was here, the things that were going on. So the effect on the Black community over a period of time was, and not just the broader practice, but particularly in academia and other areas, was that there was it was a legitimization of the Palestinian, if you will, war against Israel, framing it as a fight for justice. This is what was the plan, and over a period of time, we saw that it became more and more accepted throughout the community, right? Not just our community, the Black community. We're talking about just in general. This is why on college campuses, right? I was just talking to a Black gentleman, a friend of mine, colleague, just about a month ago, and he's an attorney. And just an example, he works with different Ivy League universities, and among the things that he does, he reads the application letters from students. They will willingly volunteer when they're explaining part of their bio, I am pro-Palestinian, without even any prompting. I'm against climate change. I'm against any discrimination against anyone based on race or sexual orientation, those things. And, oh, by the way, I'm also pro-Palestinian. And what shocked him was that no one even asked them that. They just offer that now as a social justice bona fides. This is how the Black community was exploited. It was exploited for that purpose, so that now, even today, being pro-Palestinian is being seen as justice, and being pro-Israel or even just pro-peace is seen as a negative, as somebody that you are pro-fascist, you are pro-apartheid. So that was the effect on the Black community, but how the Black community was exploited for that purpose.
And what is your sense? We've had discussions this week about the fact that our neighbors, the Palestinian Authority, have been promulgating and promoting this apartheid identity for Israel as an issue of strategy. I mean, not that as we said, went back decades, but what we've seen, as a matter of fact, today in the Knesset was just passed this evening, a law to the what's called Chok HaKizuz, or the payment freeze law of assistance to the Palestinian Authority based on their paying actually young Palestinians annuities for life to kill Israelis, not just Jews, Christians, Muslims, everybody living in the state of Israel. And tonight a law was passed that Israeli citizens who are convicted of PLO-related terror offenses would have their citizenship revoked by an overwhelming, almost a unanimous vote in the Knesset, which is quite unusual in these days of tensions in our small nation state. So, what is your sense about the objectification, if you will, or the instrumentalization of the Black community, really by the Palestinian Authority, what they call Ferguson to Palestine, and the mobilization of Black Lives Matter political movement to make that point?
What you see now in a modern iteration is what the PLO started in the late 1960s, meaning you just referred to the Ferguson to Palestine. This was made famous, that phrase, in 2014 and 15 after the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson. the lead organization that comes to begin to protest and lead these protests nationwide and then globally was Black Lives Matter, which was formed in 2013 after the acquittal of the man who killed Trayvon Martin in Florida, right? They start in 2013. Michael Brown is killed in 2014. And by late 2014, 2015, Black Lives Matter is on the ground in Ferguson, hashtagging Ferguson to Palestine. At that point, anyone who was aware of what was going on should have pumped the brakes and said, okay, wait, what is a conflict 8,000 miles away from Ferguson have to do with what just happened in Ferguson? Well, the answer to that question is you have to go back to the PLO. You have to go back to Yasser Arafat, who goes to Eldridge Cleaver, who goes to the other black leaders and says to them, this is what's happening to us. Our struggles are the same. By the time you get to the 2000s, 50 years plus, that has been so repeated, it has just been accepted, right? And the same group that then organizes there then comes to Israel, to Nazareth, and they actually organize, they shoot a whole video, and they basically say this land has been stolen. Once again, they are standing on the bodies of dead black men and women to then further an anti-Israel agenda. Nothing could have been more heinous. And the same thing with Laquan McDonald in Chicago, Breonna Taylor. Each time there was some sort of tragic conflict where it came to a black person and a white police officer, what Black Lives Matter would do and other acolytes would then make that about Israel. They even had a thing where they would work with what was called Jewish Voice for Peace, and they passed something that was called Deadly Exchange. They would actually then organize and go to city councils and to around the country and to police departments and have them sever their relationship with Israel, which helps train police officers around the world ever since 2001, because Israel is the best at counterterrorism. They were blaming Israelis and Jews anytime a black person was killed in the United States by a particular white police officer. This was the blood libel that got started in the 60s and just ramped up to a completely different level, completely victimizing the black community, because those two things have, my son wrote an article called the Palestinization of black pain, actually taking the trauma and then using that for another purpose and raising money for the same purposes as well. That's how the black community was used, started in the 60s and continues today.
To you, Irit Tratt, who is actually a scholar and board member of the Jerusalem Center, just came out today with an article on JNS in which she notes that 68% of all online digital anti-Semitism is focused on Israel. And it may come as a surprise because there are many in the West that are struggling against anti-Semitism, that are facing anti-Semitism, that do not connect it to the demonization, the apartheidization, the Nazification of Israel. And I think I'm wondering your sense of that connection, that convergence between the what we call Israel-centered or focused or targeted anti-Semitism and connecting that with what people in the West are facing.
So again, and I'll restate from the 60s till now and what it has meant internationally. This means that all the air gets sucked out of the room when it comes to speaking of any other human rights issue. So whether it's in the United States, Israel or Jews being blamed for any type of criminal justice issue, which is, again, is heinous, and it's what's been happening, again, how the weaponization in that way, or whether it's on the international level, right, where the United Nations Human Rights Council spends the lion's share of its time passing resolutions against Israel, where there's 1 million slaves in Libya, nothing, right? There's Christians that are being slaughtered in Nigeria, and it has been for the last 8-9 years, or at least since around 2014. It's not the first time, but it's been ramped up. We believe, according to a couple of the Christian organizations, some 43,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria since 2014, 13 or so, right? Hardly anything on that at all, but Israel, and that has, we've set off in our organization, no other people have paid more for international anti-Semitism than the black community and Africa. This has been the case since the 60s, and even more so now. That has been part of the result of the weaponization of the apartheid lie against Israel, the Zionism is racism lie against Israel. Not only is that not true, as Dr. King's colleagues even said in 1975, after he's gone, they start another organization called BASIC, Black Americans to Support Israel Committee, with the same talking point, saying that these things are going on in Sudan. If you read what Bayard Rustin was saying, you would swear you were reading from something from 2023, because it's the exact same thing, it's just worse. Now, he talked about the slaves in Sudan, that was 1975. He talked about the Jews who were still in Syria being killed. He talked about those things being ignored while Israel was being demonized. That's still the case today.
Klaas, I'm just going to turn to you now. You have an extraordinary story. I'm going to, yes, and yes, right. You put your credit card down there for the Klaas, you have an extraordinary story. You're a young South African professional. Your career started at the renowned Wits University, a member of the ANC Youth League, and you were actually part of the leadership of the BDS movement at that time in 2015, up until 2015, and then you were invited to Israel. What happened? What changed your view, and how come you've become not only an advocate for the Jewish and democratic state and the Jewish people abroad, but you become very outspoken on the issues of Palestinian Authority subjugation and instrumentalization of South Africans in the history of apartheid for narrow political agenda of the Palestinian Authority?
Thank you. Obviously, after being elected into leading the student government in my campus, so what happened is that I got sort of introduced to the BDS. And so I was so passionate about the whole conflict. So we felt like, as a black South African, I need to do whatever it takes to stop the apartheid that is taking place in the Middle East. And obviously, I remember at some point we used to sing songs like Dubula Judah, so meaning shoot the Jew. We used to say a number of things like one bullet, one Jew. Zionism is racism. At some point, we even marched against Barack Obama coming to South Africa. At some point, we even went to a kosher store and we put a pig head by the kosher section, because the aim was to sort of antagonize the Jewish community and antagonize all the Jewish students on our campus, making them feel how apartheid felt, because we felt like these Jewish people in South Africa are sort of perpetuating apartheid somewhere in the Middle East. But I can tell you that obviously, after being expelled from VETS and I had to sort of appeal that case, I was in 2015 I had an opportunity to come to Israel. I came to Israel as a member of the BDS at that time, knowing what apartheid was. And obviously, I had two turning points. My first turning point was when I was at the airport. Getting to the airport, Ben Gurion, because I've been drinking a lot of water on the flight, and I get there, I go through security check, I get my bag, put it on a trolley, I'm pushing it. I needed to use the restroom. So what I did first was to sort of go to the nearest security guard at the airport and ask him, what the blacks only bathrooms? And to someone was asking, did you really ask that genuinely? I'm like, look, because of how I was raised and where I come from. For example, if you take a lady that comes from a very patriarchal society and where they know that women don't sit on the same table as men, when they go to any country like liberal America, when they get USA, they'll ask, maybe in a restaurant or maybe at a church or someone, they'll ask, where are the ladies section? Because that's how they were raised. They know that women don't sit with men if you're coming from that kind of a society. So I was coming from a society where I knew what apartheid was. And I was told that in Israel, the Arabs, the blacks and the Jews don't share the beaches, they don't share the buses, they don't share clinics, hospitals, schools. So if you go to Tel Aviv University, the Arabs are not allowed there. Even the toilets, they're not allowed to share the toilets. So I asked this guy what the blacks only bathrooms, and he looked at me funny because he didn't really understand. I thought, okay, maybe this is the Middle East. People don't really understand English, so I need to find a way to sort of make this guy understand. So you know, when you speak to someone who doesn't understand your language, you have to use sign language. I had to say like blacks only bathroom, and he was like, look, we don't have that here. And he even spoke better English than mine. Yeah, so clearly he understood what I meant, but he just didn't understand maybe the context. So he's like, look, we don't have that here. That's when I explained to him that I'm from South Africa, and I was told that in Israel, the Arabs, the Jews, and the blacks, they don't share the bathrooms. He was like, look, we don't have that here. You can identify your gender and use any of those bathrooms there. Then yes. And I identified as a male, and obviously I used the male bathroom. So it was shocking to see that. I was shocking to see that because I'm from a place where we were marching on the streets. I mean, marching against Barack Obama, saying that he's giving the Israelis ammunition to kill the Palestinians. We were on campuses making sure that we shout free, free Palestine. We used to compose songs for our marches saying, shoot the Jews, one bullet, one Jew. There was a friend of mine who now obviously came later on and apologized to the Jewish community. He once said he loves Hitler on public TV. He said that while like more than 15 million people were watching, and wanted to debate and sort of justify that. So I can tell you that it was really an eye-opening experience for me to come to Israel and sort of experience everything on my own and realize actually that the BDS doesn't really care, or all these anti-Israel organizations don't really care about what's happening here. They don't care about the Palestinian cause. All they do is to sort of preach anti-Semitism using a different tagline. So they don't want to preach it directly. They find ways to preach anti-Semitism because they know if they come to South Africa and tell a black person that Israel's an apartheid state, a black person in South Africa will be touched and will be passionate about this and will go on the streets and make sure that they boycott, they divest, and sanction anything that has to do with Israel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Klaas. That's very strong personal testimony as to, and I think it's interesting what Klaas brought up was a point that needs to be made, and you talk about Zionism as racism, which of course is the underbellies, the poisonous root of the modern Israel apartheid anti-Semitism, is the 1975 General Assembly decision resolution in the United Nations, UN GA 3379, which determined that Zionism is racism, which was at that time a Soviet-led PLO effort together, combined effort, and which stood for 16 years until 1991. Rather extraordinary. So it really branded the notion, the Zionism is racism, that would lead to the aspersion of Israel being an apartheid state, and that fraudulent accusation. Bishop Plummer, how do you see it as a religious broadcaster, as a religious personality and leader, having lived in Israel now for 7 years, if I'm not mistaken, 7 or 8 years?
No, 2.5, almost 3 years.
So I just tripled your seniority.
Well, first of all, Dan, thank you for inviting us to this conversation. And when I say us, I want to identify who us is. So pardon me if I kind of turn this way, because I want to talk both to the audience, and I don't want the camera just looking in my ear, so I want to be able to at least connect. So I am the Bishop of Israel for the Church of God in Christ. That title alone has never been held by any human being in 2,000 years, the Bishop of Israel. The Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church have never had Israel in the title of any of its leaders. There's an Archbishop of Jerusalem. And so our church, the largest black church in the world, we're 115 years old. We have 6.5 million members in the United States, and we're in 113 countries around the world. Our church not only formally embraces, supports Israel, and publicly and clearly and flat-footed denounces the charge of anti-Semitism, the BDS movement, but let me give you just kind of 3 perspectives that I bring to the table. I am the official representative of our church here in Israel, so I speak officially for 6.5 million black Americans. And so let me give you my perspective. 3 things quickly. One is that, first of all, Klaas' birthday is he says tomorrow, and someone reminded him that in Judaism the day starts tonight. So really it's his birthday, and he turns 32 years old. When I was 33 in 1988, and 33 arguably is a year. Martin Luther King was 33 when he gave his I Have a Dream speech. Klaas will be 33 next year. Jesus was 33 when he died here in Israel. And so when I was 33, I was invited by the apartheid South African government as one of 8 black American leaders to come there at their expense and their invitation, which I accepted. And so 8 of us went to South Africa. Nelson Mandela was in prison. And they said to us we'd be able to visit him because that was one of our requests. And they wanted to take us around the country. We were there for 2 weeks. They want to take us around the country to show us that apartheid really is not that bad, and that it's not the way the media has presented apartheid in their country. And so that's why they invited 8 influential black American leaders there, okay? So as an American, I saw apartheid up close. In fact, I asked Klaas, I said, where do you live? And he says he lives now in Soweto. And I said, when I was in Soweto, it was at that time the most impoverished city I had ever seen, and this was during apartheid. And Klaas's response to me is, it hasn't changed too much since then. My point is that I saw apartheid up close there while the apartheid government was in control. And it was a racial-based system. And so as a black American, had I moved to South Africa, as I have moved to Israel, I would have only been allowed to live in certain neighborhoods because I'm not even colored. There's 4 classes. Black is the lowest. The next step up is colored, which is kind of a mixture of black and white. And then there is the Indian, people from India, and then there is the whites. And so I saw up close and visited these places. And so I know as an American what apartheid is as a visitor, which most people can't say that they have seen it up close as even a visitor. Klaas, I think when you were born, it was just making its change when you were a little boy. And so the second example I want to give so that I tell you my perspective is I'm from Detroit. I lived in Detroit for 45 years, Detroit, Michigan, before coming here. Detroit has the largest number of Arabs outside of the Middle East. And there's a city that they primarily have gathered and live in called Dearborn, which is the headquarters of Ford Motor Company. And for years, no black or Jew, by the way, could live in Dearborn. And even when we attempted to, we couldn't live in the city of Dearborn. I don't think there's still a Jew living in Dearborn, by the way, today. And there may be a few blacks living in Dearborn, but we never called it apartheid. And no one ever called it apartheid. And regardless of the racist policies that have existed in our country, the United States, it's never been classified as apartheid. The last statement I want to make is that I moved here in Israel. My wife and I, now almost going on, 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And we lived, first of all, no one stopped us from living wherever we wanted to live. So we lived in a town called Mevaseret Zion, which is outside of Jerusalem. And a few months ago, we moved into Jerusalem because that's what all of our folks wanted to do. We wanted to embrace Jerusalem and make a statement of support for. So I live in Malcha in Jerusalem. And no one has questioned. I lived a couple houses from your former speaker, Mickey Levy. Now in Malcha, there's an Arab that's a neighbor, an Arab Israeli. And so what I have observed in these 2.5 years, I've known this for coming here for 25 years, but what I saw up close is that there are Ethiopians. Sometimes people think I'm an Ethiopian if they just look at me. And so people who are making this apartheid claim have a short circuit in their brain when they see Ethiopians here, when they see folks like me here, but especially the Ethiopian community because they're black. And apartheid is a racial-based charge. And so it's just not true. It's not true. I say that as someone who saw apartheid up close. I say that as someone who came from an area that has been deeply segregated over the decades, and yet we've never called it apartheid. And so to call it apartheid is clearly an attack on a group of folks who are Jews, who, by the way, are not just Ashkenazi or white Jews, but Jews from India, Jews from Africa, Jews from Northern Africa, And so it is not just unfair. It is an evil and wicked charge against a group of people, and it's untrue. And I just want to add our voice. And when I say our, again, I'm speaking for our church.
Thank you, Bishop, for that clarity. Deeply appreciated. In fact, as attorney Gene Kantorovich points out in a path-breaking article in The Tower a few years ago, when both Human Rights Watch, that NGO, and Amnesty International libeled Israel as an apartheid state, he said it's really extraordinary because apartheid was a system, a government-mandated system of white supremacy and differentiation and separation based on that government-mandated legal system of white supremacy. And he said it's never happened, it's never been used in any other situation anywhere in the world, not in North Korea, not in China, not in Iran, and not in many countries in Africa where there is slavery today. Is that true, Dumisani? Right? We're seeing slavery in Nigeria, and we're seeing slavery in other countries. So I want to turn now to Minister Chikli. Minister, you have the, I think, outstanding excellence of being the first Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Social Equality who has two files under your responsibility. One is anti-Semitism, which you now have issued a report just now and presented it to the Knesset, to the Parliament, on the end of year 2022, in which you have called the new anti-Semitism, which represents a fusion between delegitimization, what has been called delegitimization in the years that since General Kuperasser ran the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, and what is called traditional anti-Semitism. So you are the first minister to fuse these two concepts. And in fact, I might share with our audience, our friends here in the library of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs and the many abroad watching this on live stream, that you are the first minister to have understood that the new anti-Semitism is focused and targeting the nation state of the Jewish people as its focus, and by extension, fueling violence, both rhetorical and physical violence against Jews worldwide, most prominently and in the West. So share with us just a little bit of your thinking. You've traveled to America. You've only been in the job for a few months, but there's really a sort of a sense of revolutionary thinking in your new combined ministry, if you will.
So thanks so much. This is one of the most fascinating panels that I've participated in the past years, and thanks so much, Klaas, Dumisani, Plummer. It's just amazing, the stories and the facts that you're bringing. I want to begin with a short story. I read to my son, Jonathan, the book of Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and I was shocked to learn that the slaves called the Mississippi River, the Jordan River, and the state of the North the Promised Land. I was reading it and said I could not believe it. That it amazed me. I had no idea about it. I found out when I was reading it for my child. And later on, 1968, as you mentioned, with Martin Luther King, one of the greatest Jews that lived in the past century, Avraham Yehoshua Eshel, accompanied him. And it was also, I think, the Jews were serious partners for the black community. And unfortunately today, there is a huge effort, a successive effort, unfortunately, to wrap the fight against the state of Israel, the new anti-Semitism, with the issues of the rights of black people in the U.S., and it creates a tragedy. And I think that maybe this evening is a significant step, to try and fight for the truth. So about the report that I've mentioned, currently we found the research where we've been checking more than 600,000 social media profiles. 68% of anti-Semitism today, especially in the US, comes from the BDS, comes from what we call the new anti-Semitism. It is wrapped in the human rights conversation. It justice, many nice words, but behind those nice words, it's the same vicious hatred, pure hatred to the Jewish people. And now, instead of attacking the Jews as individuals or as small communities, the assault is against the collective identity of the Jewish people and especially the state of Israel. That today is anti-Semitism. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot criticize Israel, but if you criticize only the state of Israel. For instance, there was this journalist that was killed accidentally in clash fires between terrorists in Jenin and our forces. Every BDS member knows their name, but they asked them if they learned the name of one other journalist who was killed in any other conflict on earth. No. No, they won't. Ask them, do you know the name of the children that were rammed by a car in a terror attack just this Friday? Or any, just mention one name of a children that was killed in the past year in terrorist attacks. Children, innocent children. No. And the biased media, CNN, New York Times, with their soft anti-Semitism, the most vicious anti-Semitism, because they are like objective. They describe this horrific terror attack as a car accident. As a car accident. And it's not new. 1975, Zionism is racism. The PLO pushed this ideology from the outside, and the Soviet Union was the one to push it from the inside with all of the state. They had the majority, and it took us a long time with the Bush administration to cancel this awful decision. And now look, our world is driven by ideas. And we see now something that we already saw in the past. Instead of all the workers of the world unite against the oppressors, now it's let's gather together LGBTQ and BLM and the Palestinians and all these oppressed groups, and let's found an enemy to unite against him. And what a coincidence. Again, us, the Jews. Now we are the whitest people on earth. That is so ridiculous. My family comes from Tunisia. So how exactly am I a white supremacist? Not to mention the Ethiopian community. This is just insane. But I'm optimistic. We've just read Parashat Yitro. Moshe and his black wife, Tzipora, and those who laughed about Tzipora were punished. Yes. And the Ten Commandments. And I want to say something for the audience. Look, if you believe in God, you believe in truth. In a world without truth, there is no possibility to have the differentiation between good and bad. And this whole narrative, especially the apartheid narrative, is one big lie. And just like the Soviet Union, it will collapse. It won't stand the test of time. Therefore, I'm optimistic. And I also very optimistic because of you. Because we're not alone. Because there are good people who understand that when you're singing one bullet, one Jew, something is wrong. Something is wrong. And I'm calling you, all the people who watch us, fight for the truth. And fight for us, for Am Israel. And we will fight together with you on your missions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Chikli. Yeah, just wanted to make mention of the fact that Brigadier General Kupperwasser here at the Jerusalem Center as the senior fellow is running one of our main initiatives, which is really what we call the Palestinian Authority Accountability Initiative. Because if you look at the source of the apartheid campaign, the lie, the slander, it is really sourced in the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is the research here under the watchful eye of General Kupperwasser and Director General Dr. Yechiel Leiter is showing. And we're in the middle of this research and drafting process right now. Perhaps, General Kupperwasser, you might take the mic and just explain for a moment the 5 categories of Palestinian Authority massive violations of Oslo. We're now in the 30th year of Oslo, Minister Chikli, and they are the source of BDS warfare. They are the source of international legal warfare. They are the source of illegal control and building in Area C. They are the source of incitement to terror, and they are the source of international anti-Semitism today, as you defined it and your ministry defined it. General Kupperwasser, can you give us a little bit of insight in the little time we have left about your work for years, frankly, on this issue?
I thank you, and I really appreciate this panel and what Minister Chikli said in the end. It's amazing, and I'm not going to speak about all the bad things that the Palestinian Authority is doing and the way it breaches its commitments according to the Oslo Agreement, supporting terrorism, paying salaries to terrorists, and so on and so forth. I want just to focus on this issue of apartheid claim, and say that, just, you know, as I think it was Einstein said, that if you let these lies be heard and you do nothing, then you are responsible. We are in the same situation. Look, on January 31st, Secretary Blinken visited Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, in Ramallah. Abu Mazen was standing next to him and was immediately, without even really welcoming him, he immediately started to say, Israel is bad, Israel is terrible, Israel is doing this, Israel is doing that. And finally he said, Israel is an apartheid state. And Secretary Blinken, instead of saying, no, Israel is not an apartheid state, all these people can testify for that, he started to pay his condolences for the fallen Palestinians and Israelis in the last couple of days, which are including the terrorist Palestinians who were killed in Jenin and the 7 Israelis who were killed in near the synagogue in Jerusalem, Neve Yaakov. If we don't address this lie immediately, this lie is going to keep moving forward. We need to do something. I really think that the 3 of you can do something about it. Just, I don't know, write a joint op-ed in the Jerusalem Post or in the Washington Post somewhere to say, look, Mr. Blinken, you should have said something about it. This is not true. And because if we just stay silent, we are complicit in this crime of spreading the libel of apartheid about Israel. Sure.
You mentioned Blinken and the apartheid, but just recently, this year it's 50 years for the massacre of 11 innocent sportsmen in Munich. And we had Abu Mazen coming to Germany, and in front of the eyes of the German chancellors on German soil, instead of saying we're sorry for killing 11 innocent people who did nothing, he said Israel committed 50 Holocaust, and the German chancellor remained silent.
Same thing.
Silent.
That's why I'm saying that if we, honest people, do not speak and speak loudly refute these allegations, they will remain there, and more people will think that it is all right to say it because look, everybody is looking into the other direction. Let's go on saying this, and we are all going to pay the national security price for that, and that's why I think that what we see here is the opportunity of turning the intersectionality on its head. We should use the intersectionality in order to diffuse this kind of activities and to come against them.
Let me just say one thing before I turn to Pastor Dumisani. The positive intersectionality is something, frankly, that the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs is advancing, in the sense that for the first time ever, 14 Arab and African states, including states that do not have diplomatic relations with the State of Israel, are coming to Jerusalem for a JCPA-hosted conference on national security, human security, water security, food security, radicalization or anti-radicalization, political cohesion, and they're looking to the Jewish and democratic state for guidance. Now, that to me seems like a good example, General Kupwasser, of what you're talking about intersectionality, and we have positive intersectionality with black leadership from the United States to my left, South African black leadership to my right, and the first time that these different leaders from the African American community and the South African black community are sitting with a senior minister of the Israeli government, all agreeing on the need to disembowel the apartheid poison. And so I just want to say that and turn to Pastor Dumisani in a couple of minutes that we have left to your observation.
Several of those things, and I'll do that second part, Dan. So first part, Yossi, General Kupwasser, actually hosted one of our events, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, earlier last year. It may have been in the summer. He spoke to some of our constituents both in the United States and in West Africa. And the reason why we had that, it was actually an event in which some of our colleagues there, in Ghana particularly, had reached out about strengthening their security there. And what had happened was this was the occasion. It was written about in Jerusalem Post, a couple other papers. A couple of Iranian terror cells planted in Ghana were planning a terrorist attack against Israelis and Jews. And some of those who don't know, there's an Igbo community that's there that they have several synagogues that are there. They were actually planning attacks on those people. They heard about it and they reached out to us to strengthen their security. But this is what happened. The terror attack was foiled by the Ghanaian police working with the Israeli Mossad, and it was uncovered. A week later, the same thing happened in Kenya, right? What we had already published on one of our pieces that we did on our Substack, we talked about the fact that as of last spring 2022, Africa had transitioned to the #1 hotspot of terrorism in the world, from the Middle East to Africa. And of course, Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terror. This is another one of those negative intersectionalities, right? Not only is Israel being demonized, not only is all these other situations in the other parts of the world being ignored, Africa again paying the price as terror cells across the continent, in South Africa, in Ghana, in Kenya, and throughout. And who does Africa reach out to help push back on those? Israel. Why? Because #1, Israel's the #1 in counterterrorism. #2, from the days of Golda Meir, who was the first foreign minister in Africa in the 1950s, Israel and Africa have worked together very, very closely. And this is something that we were reiterating at the time. And so even with this conference that Dan was just speaking of, our organization is also championing it. We're talking about it. We'll be planning. We'll be here. God say the same. My wife and I will return, because part of our advocacy when it comes to Israel, the Jewish state of Israel, within the black community, is also highlighting Israel's relationship with Africa. We often say the first Israel-Africa summit was when the Queen of Sheba 3,000 years ago came and visited Solomon in this city, right? And so we talk about that actual relationship having actually not just, we talked about even in First Kings, it talks about what she experienced, but we see it both spiritual and it's geopolitical. There are interests that are there from thousands of years ago to today, and this is something. Dr. King himself attended the inauguration of Kwame Nkrumah there in 1957 in Ghana, as well as the Israeli leaders. There has always been this connection with the black American community in Africa is concerned, and we will see that continue as we are doing the work here.
Thank you very much,
I know you're
Pastor.
out of time, but I have to say
As
something.
they say on the radio, 30 seconds, Pastor.
I just want to caution Israeli leaders and Israelis in general that you may be guilty of doing something that you're fighting against, and that is you're fighting against people who are spreading a lie, and you don't want people to believe it. I have found that Israelis believe that black Americans are not really supportive of Israel, and that is a lie. You mentioned the 1975 Proclamation of the United Nations that Zionism is racism. Over 200, you mentioned the Black Americans Support of Israel Committee. Over 200 of the top Black American leaders of that day, congressional members, entertainers, baseball, in every category, over 200 leaders, church bishops, all signed a document within 1 week and bought a big ad in the New York Times that says Zionism is not racism, and we gave 7 major points of support for Israel, why we support Israel, why the Palestinian Authority has taken advantage of black Americans and black folks in the world. And so here we are today, and I'm here, and we're here to say to you, we are natural allies. We are standing with you. And if you believe a few loud voices, loud mouths, if I may say that, like a Louis Farrakhan, like a few people on the extreme who are not only enemies, by the way, of Israel, they're enemies of the black church as well. If you choose to believe that and say that's the black community and we've lost connection, you've accepted a lie. We are here. We're standing with you. We support you. We love you, actually. You want to know the truth. And just my church, we have as many members in my church as you have Jews in the United States. Martin Luther King was at our church giving his final mountaintop speech, by the way. It was at our headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee, that he spoke those words. And when he said it, what people don't understand is right before he said, I've been to the mountaintop, and I've seen the promised land, he said these words. When I was in Jerusalem, I rented a car, and I drove from Jerusalem to Jericho with my wife. So he went on to tell about the elevation, and it took him 15 to 20 minutes to drive. Martin Luther King was in Jerusalem. He was a supporter of Israel. He was a Zionist. And so you need to understand, you've got not only friends, but allies in great number. Take advantage of us.
We're going to take advantage. In fact, and in the remaining, Dr. Plummer, I'm going to take the prerogative of taking your question time and asking a question of Bishop Plummer, if you wouldn't mind, just before we end, which is, can I ask you to commit, based on what you said, Bishop and Pastor Dumisani, to create something after we had the declaration just after the 1975 Zionism is racism smear, the 2023 declaration that says racism is racism and Zionism is freedom, and make that the declaration for the black community, and let's try to get those 9 million members of between the two of you, or 10 million members of churches across America, the pastors of those communities, to sign that declaration.
I will not only commit to that publicly, but I will also add to that. In South Africa, we have dozens of pastors and churches. We have 7 jurisdictions, I think, in South Africa. Your Israeli ambassador asked in South Africa, the Israeli ambassador in South Africa, asked my wife and I, can we do something together in South Africa to celebrate the independence of Israel? And I said to him, let's do it. Let's do it. And the 75th year, which is only almost days away, we want to do that. And so in a public forum, we will make that announcement in South Africa. South Africa.
Book your tickets, folks. Good. I want to mention just that Dr. Joel Fishman wrote an outstanding piece called "Disaster of Another Kind" about the Zionism is racism resolution and the historical context for that, and it's a very, very helpful piece to understand everything we've talked about. Professor Richard Landis behind him has also been Boston University renowned, has also been very involved in this entire issue for many decades. Can I just take this opportunity to thank everyone, because I know that we're about to go off the air. We may just now be off the air. There's a cane that has been pulled across. And thank everybody for joining us. General Cooperwasser, Bishop Plummer, Pastor Dumisani Washington, Minister Amichai Chikli, and Klaas Mokgomole. Thank you very, very much all for joining you. And thank you all. And thank all our friends abroad for joining us. This is Dan Diker, President of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. And please continue to join us as we continue this initiative on what we call holding the PA accountable, and also we're going to be writing an appendium on an historical and contemporary analysis of the whole apartheid libel. Thank you ever so much, all of you, for joining us.